So Gabbard is finally out. It's kind of surprising. I think people thought that Kash Patel was up next, but you know, add her to the list of people that have been ousted since Trump has started his purges in the last couple of months. But what's interesting for Gabbard is that there's an ideological element that was not shared by the other firings. Trump's other firings, specifically Bondi and a few other people, were because they were not accomplishing the things he wanted them to do. They had administrative goals set out, like retribution against his enemies, and they were unable to fulfill them. Gabbard is very different, though, because I think she posed an actual ideological threat. So just moving over to this. For Tulsi, one, they're having her gracefully go out. There was rumors for a long time that she was leaving. Now they're having her leave, saying she did a great job, but that she's spending time with her husband who has cancer, and she didn't feel like she could fulfill the obligations of her job while also seeing to him. And that makes sense, of course. But when you go deeper, I'm like, why she was actually removed from office, it gets a little more complicated. There were 3 distinct military events that Gabbard was not a part of, which was bizarre for a DNI. She wasn't involved in the original strikes in Iran last summer, which were Operation Midnight Hammer. She was not involved in the capturing of Maduro, and she was not involved in the most recent strikes on Iran between the United States and Israel. What was uniquely concerning, though, was that not only was she not involved in a lot of these, but she literally didn't receive the briefings. As the head of a DNI, this is the person who's supposed to be at the forefront of a lot of these decisions, let alone not being let in on the briefings. It was so extreme, in fact, that apparently for the Maduro operation, she just wasn't privy to any of the information at all prior to it occurring. And the reason for this is because Tulsi Gabbard is known to be an intelligence risk. Prior to Tulsi Gabbard's transition to the Trump team, she emerged as like an ex-military person, very skeptical of American foreign intervention in the Democratic Party, ran as a progressive populist. Now, during that period of time, she garnered a really strange reputation for being aligned with the Russian sphere of influence. And you can see it easily in her comments on Ukraine, where in the, right leading up to the Russia-Ukraine invasion, she's reported for saying Biden can very easily prevent a war with Russia by guaranteeing that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. The reason she's saying this, although it seems innocuous at first, NATO is a defensive pact. There has almost never been elements or events where NATO has ever overseen. NATO is a defensive pact. There has never been a situation where NATO has aggressively challenged any world power, and the only times NATO has ever overseen aggressive actions, they were seen to be in defense of what were universally, or at least internationally, condemned as being war crimes, like in Eastern Europe during the late 90s. And seeing that, her reputation is that of someone who was ex-military and should understand how combat operations work, it would be very surprising if she didn't understand what NATO was implicitly. And then you learn as well, Tulsi Gabbard was a darling of RT News, a Russia Today, that is the arm of the Russian, state news apparatus that is meant to target Western audiences to help sell propaganda that is Western coded or whatever. She has appeared on their programs countless amounts of times, and she is always providing that same sort of uniquely coded anti-United States, pro-Russia, pro-third worldist, propaganda that's meant to target the American government. And perhaps the most concerning one was when she had a surprise trip to Syria in 2017 to visit the Assad regime and apparently meet Assad. Now, while the House Ethics Committee greenlit this this trip in some capacity, the very nature of it is not just concerning, but bizarre. It's confusing. She claimed that she went on this as a fact-finding mission, but her own staff had no idea what the plans were or what fact-finding was occurring or what sort of summary report would be done afterwards. She spun it eventually as sort of just to learn more about like the struggle and to, understand more, why there was a, weird U.S. push to get Assad out, kind of an anti-Obama spin. And the fact is that Assad at this point in time had long been, discounted as what he was seen ideally as, which was a brutal yet necessary faction in the Middle East to help suppress terrorism. Well into the Syrian civil war, and again, this is 2017, it was understood at this point, Assad was not seen as that force. Assad at this point was seen as a collaborator with terrorist forces. He was seen as a collaborator with Hezbollah, a collaborator with elements of terrorists that were, either Taliban associated or ISIS associated. Assad was a nasty guy who was, for all intents and purposes, from a United States perspective, harmful to not just the region, but internationally as well. But it just so happens that Assad was buddy-buddy with Putin. Assad was a really important member of the Middle Eastern coalition that Putin had established, and he provided quite a lot of cover for Russia, broadly speaking. She's been very quiet as well since his ousting, perhaps adding fuel to the fire that she is a Russian asset, or at least compromised. Going back then to these examples of these military operations she wasn't included in, well, the only reasonable interpretation of that could be that the Trump team is concerned about her authenticity. They think she might be a foreign asset. And we know this because, I'm not sure if this article puts it in here, but her entire activity, as well as her teams, was apparently being severely moderated, or at least monitored, in the sense that all of her keystrokes were being detected by third-party affiliates in the White House. Meaning that even in Trump's White House, he had a secret deep state apparatus that was meant to sort of follow Tulsi around to make sure she wasn't selling our secrets or getting involved in things she shouldn't be getting involved in, when Tulsi's job is supposed to be that. She is supposed to be the deep state operative for intelligence. So the entire premise was confusing. And if we go back to the election, why did Tulsi get put into her role? Why was she a part of the Trump coalition? Well, it was a similar case to RFK, where these are two people who come from the populist left. They come from a progressive background. And they realized they could find a home in Trump's coalition. They could provide a sort of level of cover that doesn't exist, generally speaking, for Trump, because, prior to this administration, who did he have the opportunity to work with in his cabinet? Neocons. People who, out of convenience, will, be allies with him because they're a part of the same party, but people who share very little ideological symmetry, or people who don't connect with the MAGA base authentically with their real views. But Tulsi and RFK genuinely do connect with the MAGA base. The MAGA base is critical about U.S. power. They do support people like Snowden, which Tulsi Gabbard is famously called to have him pardoned. And RFK is similar in the sense that, a lot of the MAGA base does not trust big pharma. They don't trust the idea of how the FDA has functioned in the past. They assume collusion. They assume corruption. So all of these broader populist talking points actually fit nicely. But the question for RFK has never been how will he implement things, because we've seen it. We've seen his influence at every step of the way with the HHS. But for Gabbard, it's just not there. Gabbard's influence has been a lingering question, and a disturbing one at that, because if Gabbard is this person who really does have these strange ideological commitments related to foreign policy, you'd imagine it would come through in some way. And if we're not seeing how it comes through, the concern is what's going on behind closed doors. Now, it seems like she was genuinely just not allowed to do a lot of her job, and Trump kept giving her strange assignments, like collecting material at Fulton County in Georgia to further his election denial claims. It's unclear, and her ousting is even more concerning because Trump has wanted to publicly oust her multiple times. Why now? Trump wanted to oust her 2 months ago, when she won in front of a House committee and publicly condemned the Iran war in as, broad of terms as she could while being in her role. She even went as far as to say that she believed that Iran did not pose any immediate threat to the United States, and that we did it instead at the advice of Israel, which is contrary to everything that Trump, Hegseth, Rubio, Vance, and practically everyone else in the administration has said. So I think the bigger question is, like, where do things go beyond this? And what does this mean for the Trump movement and coalition and the literal government? It's impossible to say with what we know publicly what role Gabbard had, but clearly her placement in the administration was tactical. It was to signal to this broader populist base that MAGA was supposed to be, this sort of new Republican ideology, a post-party lines of the Reagan era and beyond into something new. And Trump has all but abandoned that. He has given up the figurehead of that movement, Marjorie Taylor Greene, to the wolves, completely distanced himself. He has turned his back on a lot of the affordability concerns that he ran on, in fact, calling affordability a scam. And with Tulsi, it just seems like the, complete betrayal of it. All you really have left of that movement in Trump's White House, in the factional representation, is perhaps RFK, and we don't even know what sort of levels of control he currently has. I think it signals that Trump doesn't believe that the populist wing is, one, essential, or two, impactful in our current political environment. These are decisions that are all being made in anticipation of the midterms. So the question would be, well, if you're doing this in anticipation of the midterms, you have to assume it's not impactful enough to matter, if not good, for your results. And I think it loops back to a broader point about electoral politics that gets forgotten often, which is that the way that you get into an administration, especially if you're running a campaign against an incumbent or a pseudo-incumbent like Kamala, is you have to frame yourself as an outsider. Go back in American history. Almost every candidate, especially the modern era, that has been able to win has come out as an outsider, especially in the Republican Party. Go back to Nixon, the ultimate outsider candidate, or how it looked to even the Bush dynasty. These guys were seen as outsiders not because of their position, not because of these were people who had prestige, but they were seen as outsiders because they were seen as a sort of Southern, born and bred ranch archetype, and not this, group of people who were coddled and groomed in D.C. Regardless of how much truth there is to any of this, it's more about the optics. But once you're in power, it's not the same game. Even for something like the midterms, you're thinking broader or more broadly about what is the coalition that gets what you want to get done. To use a truism, like it's no longer about the package you're selling. It's about your goals. And what are Trump's goals? They seem to be primarily regarding aesthetic funding, his arch, his ballroom, or more fungibility in Congress. It almost seems like Trump would be more willing to compromise Congress further, lose seats or whatever, than he would to be keeping along people like Tulsi, or to, in a more extreme degree, Cornyn in Texas, who he has forsaken for Paxton because Paxton was willing to advocate for the SAVE Act when Cornyn knew it was dead in the water. All of this seems kind of, I guess, simple at first glance or whatever, but there has to be some underlying element to the actual party, or the actual White House administration, because Trump is stupid, obviously. But I think there's obviously a cost-benefit analysis going on, and people like Tulsi are dead weight. It's not just because of their ideological fixations, which might be weird, that might be concerning. It's because, first and foremost, they're not effective. They're not good at getting things done. Even RFK, again, it's easy to destroy, which is what someone like RFK is doing when this sort of tearing down of regulations and impositions that are destructive. But when Tulsi Gabbard steps into the DNI, it's about building an intelligence apparatus that can fulfill the needs and desires of Donald Trump. And when that doesn't happen, what purpose is there to keep her along if she provides no electoral edge, or at least the electoral edge he feels is necessary to get what he wants accomplished, which is a Congress that is willing to, abide by his demands, that is willing to let things go, that is willing to get on his train and never provide resistance like she has shown for countless foreign policy conflicts that she clearly has a differing opinion on. Is it wise? I'm not sure. It seems like she was incompetent, or sorry, not even allowed to demonstrate incompetence because they knew she was compromised from the beginning. But, perhaps we'll learn more information that clarifies it. But I would continue to look towards this stuff as a sort of like North Star for understanding the way the Republican Party is moving, because this is a real split in that where these populists go is a mystery. Could they go to the Democratic Party and invest in? Perhaps there might be a new dynamic, a new opportunity for that. Or are the people who are being replaced, these populists are being replaced with the diehard MAGA populists who are MAGA before being populists? Is there a way those people can even make a Republican Party post-Trump? I don't know. It's an interesting question, but I just wanted to explore a little bit of the dynamics for why Tulsi may have been fired, why her stepping out actually shakes things up quite a bit. And I'd be super interested to hear what other people in the comments think after hearing this. Agree, disagree, did you learn anything? I don't know. But yeah, thank you for checking in, and hopefully I'll see you at one of my streams. I try to stream every day, so yep, bye-bye.